sky over Iraq was just torn apart by one of the most violent assaults in decades, marking a dark new chapter for the United States' presence in the Middle East. What we are witnessing is not merely an isolated skirmish, but a worst-case scenario that Pentagon strategists have long feared, but never truly prepared to face. A terrifying rain of 50 ballistic missiles slammed into a strategic United States military base, turning a fortress once considered invincible into a chaotic sea of fire in an instant. Sirens wailed in vain as advanced missile defense systems, often marketed as impenetrable, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the incoming barrage. Thick black smoke billowed hundreds of feet into the air, blotting out the remaining lights in the area and creating an apocalyptic scene in the heart of the Middle East. But the most shocking news did not stop there. Raw field reports from the ground indicate that the base's strict security perimeter has been officially breached following the suppressive fire. Iraqi armed forces, supported by mysterious local proxy groups and sophisticated intelligence networks, took advantage of the chaos to swarm through the rubble of the outer walls, directly infiltrating the final defensive rings of the facility. This is a historic turning point, an event that could fundamentally reshape the geopolitical chessboard that Washington has carefully arranged over the last 20 years. While the world is still reeling from the recent decapitation strikes against Tehran's top leadership, this direct raid in Iraq serves as a brutal wake-up call to the global superpower. Blurred satellite imagery and leaked intelligence reports suggest an unthinkable scenario. American soldiers, equipped with the world's most advanced gear, are facing such immense pressure that they are being forced to make life-or-death decisions in total chaos. The biggest question hanging over every geopolitical observer right now is whether United States forces are truly in retreat under the weight of this unprecedented ground assault. Unofficial reports of mobile units and armored convoys moving away from the epicenter of the attack are fueling serious doubts about the United States' ability to maintain its grip on this volatile region. If a forced retreat is confirmed, it would be a strategic collapse more painful and humiliating than what the world witnessed in Afghanistan just a few years ago. This event unfolds as the administration of President Donald Trump intensifies a full-scale military campaign against Iran, with bold claims of quick and absolute victory through overwhelming technological superiority. However, the brutal reality on the ground in Iraq tells a different story, one filled with dangerous miscalculations and failed intelligence. The fact that 50 missiles could pierce the defensive screen to clear a path for ground troops suggests high-level tactical coordination and meticulous preparation by forces that were supposed to be disorganized. Analysts suggest this is a message of steel sent directly to Washington. The era of unilateral order through air power alone is over. This chaos affects not only the lives of soldiers on the ground, but also sends massive shockwaves through global financial and energy markets. Every passing second makes the prospect of a humiliating withdrawal more visible on the smoke-filled horizon of Iraq, leaving a dangerous power vacuum that no one can truly predict. The world watches with bated breath as the perimeter falls. The breach of the perimeter was not a slow collapse, but a sudden, violent shattering of the long-held illusion of American safety in the region. As the final salvos of the 50-rocket barrage impacted, the outer defensive walls, built to withstand years of siege, were reduced to jagged teeth of concrete and twisted rebar. Through the swirling dust and the orange glow of burning fuel depots, the first waves of Iraqi attackers were seen moving with a purpose and coordination that suggests they were waiting for this exact moment of vulnerability. These were not just ragtag militia members, but highly trained tactical units, potentially bolstered by advisors who have spent decades studying the weaknesses of Western defensive doctrines. As they pushed through the gaps in the fence, the sound of small arms fire began to echo through the corridors of the base, a sound that has not been heard inside a major United States installation in this manner since the darkest days of the Iraq War. The psychological impact of seeing foreign flags being raised over the ramparts of a base that was supposed to be the nerve center of American power in the sector cannot be overstated. It is a visual testament to a shifting tide, a signal to every actor in the region that the red lines drawn by Washington are now being crossed with impunity. Reports from inside the facility paint a harrowing picture of a command structure struggling to maintain order amidst the chaos. Military personnel, who only moments before were monitoring high-tech sensors and drone feeds, found themselves grabbing rifles and searching for cover as the perimeter security teams were pushed back. The phrase retreat is one that the Pentagon avoids at all costs, preferring terms like tactical repositioning or retrograde maneuvers. But to the eyes of the world, the sight of armored convoys forcing their way out of the secondary gates tells a much more direct story. Heavy transport vehicles, laden with sensitive equipment and shaken personnel, were seen accelerating away from the rising plumes of smoke, leaving behind a facility that has effectively become a combat zone. This movement is being interpreted by regional analysts as a sign that the United States military has determined the base is no longer defensible in its current state, or perhaps that the risk of a mass casualty event or a hostage situation has become too high to ignore. If this is indeed a retreat, it represents a catastrophic failure of the deterrence policy that has been the cornerstone of American foreign policy in the Middle East for generations. The global reaction has been one of stunned disbelief. In the halls of power in Washington, a heavy silence has descended as officials scramble to verify the extent of the damage and the status of the personnel. For a presidency that has staked its reputation on strength and the restoration of American greatness, the image of soldiers withdrawing under fire from an Iraqi force is a devastating blow. The irony is not lost on observers that this escalation follows a series of high-profile strikes by the United States and Israel against Iranian leadership, strikes that were intended to decapitate the enemy and force a surrender. Instead, it seems those actions have ignited a fuse that is now burning through the very foundations of the American presence in Iraq. The narrative of a quick and decisive victory is rapidly dissolving into the reality of a grinding, unpredictable conflict, where the conventional advantages of a superpower are being neutralized by unconventional tactics and sheer numbers. As the night deepens, the situation remains fluid and extremely dangerous, with every new report adding another layer of uncertainty to an already volatile landscape. The world is witnessing the unfolding of a strategic nightmare, where the lines between victory and defeat are being blurred by the smoke of a burning base. Every decision made in the next few hours will determine not just the fate of this base, but the future of American influence in the world. As the dust from the initial 50-rocket barrage begins to settle, a chilling silence has fallen over the electronic warfare suites and command centers that once hummed with the confidence of absolute technological superiority. The failure of the counter-rock artillery and mortar systems, known as CRAM, to intercept the incoming fire has sent shockwaves through the military establishment. These systems, designed to shred incoming projectiles with a wall of tungsten, were simply saturated by the sheer volume of the assault. For every rocket the automated guns managed to track and destroy, 2 more found their mark, striking critical infrastructure, fuel bladders, and communication arrays. This was not a random act of desperation, but a calculated saturation strike intended to blind and deafen the base before the ground assault began. In the wake of the news regarding the death of the Iranian supreme leader, it appears that the restraint previously shown by regional actors has evaporated entirely. What we are seeing is the manifestation of a scorched earth policy, a direct and brutal answer to the precision strikes that targeted the heart of the Iranian command structure just days ago. The hunter has become the hunted, and the sanctuary of the American base has been transformed into a kill zone where high-tech sensors are being rendered useless by fire, smoke, and the raw courage of an invading force that feels it has nothing left to lose. Inside the perimeter, the situation has devolved into a series of isolated, desperate engagements. Iraqi units, some reportedly wearing the insignias of elite counter-terrorism divisions but operating with the fierce religious fervor of motivated militias, have seized several key maintenance hangars and at least 1 auxiliary runway. Leaked audio from internal radio frequencies reveals a frantic attempt by United States commanders to establish a coherent defensive line, but the speed of the breach has made this nearly impossible. Soldiers are reporting close-quarters combat in areas that were, until tonight, considered deep in the green zone of safety. There are unconfirmed reports of sensitive documents and encrypted equipment being destroyed by American personnel to prevent them from falling into the hands of the encroaching forces. This is the ultimate nightmare for any military commander, a base overrun not just by shells and missiles, but by boots on the ground. The physical presence of Iraqi forces within the wire represents a total collapse of the security environment that the United States has spent billions of dollars and decades of effort to build. It is a moment of profound vulnerability that is being broadcast in real time to a world that is watching the myth of American invincibility crumble under the weight of 50 rockets and a determined ground breach. The political fallout in Baghdad is equally chaotic. The Iraqi government, caught between its reliance on American security guarantees and the overwhelming pressure from pro-Iranian factions and a population enraged by recent strikes, is in a state of paralysis. While official statements from the Green Zone remain vague, the reality on the street is one of celebration and defiance. For many in the region, this attack is seen as a long overdue rebalancing of power. The narrative being pushed by regional media outlets is one of liberation, framing the breach of the base as the first step in a total expulsion of Western forces from the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Trump administration faces a binary choice with no easy exit: double down on a massive military escalation that could lead to a full-scale regional war, or accept the reality of a strategic retreat that would signal the end of American hegemony in the Persian Gulf. The rhetoric coming out of Washington remains defiant, with promises of a crushing response, but the tactical reality on the ground dictates a much more sober assessment. If the base cannot be retaken within the next few hours, the decision to evacuate the remaining personnel may become a necessity rather than a choice. Every minute that passes with Iraqi forces inside the perimeter is a minute where the risk of a mass hostage crisis or a catastrophic loss of life grows exponentially. The world stands on the precipice of a new era, one where the rules of engagement have been rewritten in fire and blood on the plains of Iraq. As the perimeter walls became nothing more than rubble, the tactical reality inside the base shifted from defense to survival. The order for a fighting withdrawal, often the most dangerous maneuver in modern warfare, was issued from a subterranean bunker that was itself vibrating from secondary explosions. Soldiers who had spent months in the relative safety of the fortified compound were now forced to navigate a labyrinth of burning hangars and shattered barracks. Every corner of the base had become a potential ambush point. The sound of heavy diesel engines roared as Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles attempted to create a corridor for unarmored transport trucks. However, the sheer volume of the encroaching forces made every foot of movement a bloody struggle. This was no longer just a riot or a localized breach. It was a coordinated military operation designed to humiliate the world's most powerful military on a global stage. The technological edge that the United States usually relies upon was being systematically dismantled. Swarms of small, inexpensive commercial drones, modified to carry explosive charges, buzzed over the base like angry hornets. These low-cost weapons targeted the expensive radar arrays and communication masts that allowed the base to coordinate with overhead satellite assets. By blinding the defenders, the attackers turned a high-tech fortress into a confusing maze of fire and shadow. In Washington, the Situation Room was a scene of controlled panic. The live feeds from high-altitude surveillance drones, which usually provide a clear picture of the battlefield, were frequently interrupted by local electronic interference or the thick, oily smoke rising from the burning fuel farms. Analysts watched in horror as the blue icons representing friendly units began to cluster and move toward the emergency extraction points, a clear sign that the base's internal defense had failed. The human cost of this breach is only beginning to be understood. Medics worked frantically in the back of moving vehicles, trying to stabilize the wounded while the vehicles themselves were being peppered with small arms fire. The psychological trauma of being overrun in what was supposed to be a safe haven will haunt the survivors for a lifetime. For the first time in recent memory, the image of American personnel being forced out of their own installations by a determined local force was becoming a reality. The irony is that this collapse is occurring even as the United States claims to have achieved its strategic goals by targeting the leadership in Tehran. It appears that by striking the head of the snake, the administration has inadvertently released a swarm of decentralized and highly motivated actors who no longer feel bound by any rules of traditional warfare. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across the wreckage of the base, the scale of the disaster became clear. Tens of millions of dollars in sensitive equipment were being left behind or destroyed in place to prevent capture. Abandoned armored vehicles sat idling in the middle of the tarmac, their doors hanging open, as the last of the convoys pushed through the smoke toward the relative safety of the desert. But safety is a relative term in a country that has been turned into a giant ambush zone. The road ahead for these withdrawing troops is fraught with danger, as every bridge and intersection is a potential site for an improvised explosive device. The breach of the perimeter was only the beginning of a long and painful odyssey. The world is watching, and the message being sent is one that will resonate for decades. Even the strongest armor can be pierced when the tactical foundations are crumbling under the weight of 50 rockets and a loss of strategic focus. The silence that followed the departure of the last American convoys was short-lived, replaced by the triumphant shouts of those who had spent years wishing for this exact moment. As the sun climbed higher, casting a harsh light on the smoldering ruins of the base, the full extent of the strategic disaster became undeniable. It was not just a loss of territory. It was a total collapse of the deterrence framework that had sustained the American presence in the region for over 20 years. Images began to flood social media, showing local fighters walking through the very halls that had once housed the most secretive operations in the Middle East. They handled abandoned equipment with a mix of curiosity and contempt, broadcasting their victory to a global audience in real time. For the Pentagon, these images are a nightmare realized. The loss of sensitive technology is one thing, but the loss of face is an entirely different category of defeat. The world is seeing that even the most advanced military on Earth can be forced into a tactical retreat when the geopolitical ground shifts beneath their feet. This event did not happen in a vacuum. It is the direct consequence of a series of escalations that have pushed the region to the breaking point. The recent strikes against the Iranian leadership were intended to send a message of absolute strength, but they instead triggered a coordinated and decentralized response that the United States was clearly not prepared to handle. Analysts are now pointing to a massive intelligence failure, questioning how 50 rockets could be positioned and fired without detection, and how the internal security of such a vital facility could be breached so quickly. There are whispers of betrayal within the local security forces, suggesting that the very people the United States was training and funding may have played a role in the facility's downfall. This creates a crisis of trust that will make any future military cooperation in the region nearly impossible. If the United States cannot trust its local partners, its ability to project power without a massive, permanent troop presence is effectively neutralized. In the White House, the atmosphere is one of intense debate and mounting pressure. The administration is being pulled in two opposite directions. On one side, the hawks are calling for an immediate and overwhelming military response, suggesting that anything less than a full-scale invasion would be seen as a sign of terminal weakness. They argue that the United States must reclaim the base at any cost to preserve its global standing. On the other side, a growing number of strategists are warning that the United States is being lured into a trap, a grinding war of attrition that would bleed the nation dry and alienate its remaining allies. They point to the economic impact, noting that oil prices have already spiked to levels not seen in a decade, threatening to derail the global economy. Every decision made in the Situation Room is being weighed against the potential for a catastrophic regional conflict that could draw in nuclear powers. Meanwhile, the narrative in the Middle East is shifting rapidly. For decades, the presence of the United States military was seen as an immutable fact of life. That perception has been shattered. The breach of the perimeter and the subsequent retreat are being framed as the end of an era. Regional powers like Russia and China are watching closely, ready to fill the void that a withdrawing America would leave behind. The geopolitical map is being redrawn in real time, and the ink is the smoke from the burning base in Iraq. This is no longer just about one base or one battle. It is about the future of global leadership. The question is no longer if the United States will leave Iraq, but how much of its influence it can salvage before the exit is complete. The world is witnessing a historic realignment, where the old rules of engagement no longer apply, and the risks are higher than they have ever been in the modern age. The long shadows cast by the morning sun now stretch across a landscape that has been irrevocably altered, not just by steel and high explosives, but by the shattering of a decades-old geopolitical order. The breach of this strategic perimeter and the subsequent withdrawal of United States forces will be studied in military academies for generations as the moment when the era of unchallenged Western hegemony in the Middle East finally reached its breaking point. For years, the presence of these sprawling installations served as a physical manifestation of Washington's maximum pressure campaign, a silent promise that American power could reach any target and withstand any retaliation. But tonight, that promise was burned to ashes alongside the fuel depots and command centers. The failure to secure the base against a force of 50 rockets and a coordinated ground assault suggests a systemic collapse of the very intelligence and defense umbrellas that were supposed to guarantee regional stability. It is a sobering realization that the most expensive military machine in human history could be outmaneuvered by a combination of decentralized tactics, local knowledge, and an absolute willingness to sacrifice. The strategic void left by this retreat is already being filled by a surge of nationalist and pro-Iranian sentiment that threatens to sweep away the remaining pillars of American influence in Iraq. In the wake of the confirmed death of the supreme leader, the expected collapse of the Iranian regime did not materialize as a democratic uprising, but rather as a unified, vengeful mobilization that has now tasted a significant victory on the battlefield. This is the tragic irony of the current administration's strategy. By striking at the head of the leadership in Tehran, they have inadvertently unleashed a multi-headed insurgency that no longer operates under the predictable rules of state-to-state diplomacy. The scenes of Iraqi forces and local militias standing atop the ruins of the base are being broadcast into every home from Damascus to Beirut, serving as a powerful recruitment tool for every group that seeks to challenge the status quo. The psychological barrier of fear has been broken, and in the world of geopolitics, once that barrier falls, it can almost never be reconstructed. As the international community watches the fallout, the economic repercussions are beginning to manifest in a global energy crisis that could dwarf the shocks of the 1970s. With the Persian Gulf turned into a front line and American bases no longer seen as secure anchors for trade, the price of oil has entered a period of extreme volatility that threatens to paralyze Western economies. Behind the scenes, the diplomatic missions of rival superpowers are already moving to offer themselves as the new honest brokers of regional security. Russia and China are observing these events with a calculated silence, recognizing that the United States has become mired in the very type of forever war that it once promised to end. The base overrun is not just a localized military defeat. It is a signal to the world that the unipolar moment has passed, replaced by a chaotic and multipolar reality where raw power and local resolve can successfully defy a global superpower. For the soldiers who lived through this night of fire, the return home will be marked by a heavy sense of loss and a deep questioning of the mission they were asked to perform. They were told that their presence was the only thing preventing a total regional collapse, yet they were forced to witness that collapse from within their own walls. The narrative of a clean, high-tech victory has been replaced by the messy, blood-stained reality of a retreat under fire. As the last transport planes disappear into the horizon, leaving behind the smoldering remains of a billion-dollar fortress, the silence that returns to the Iraqi desert is not one of peace, but of an ominous transition. The world now waits to see how the United States will respond to this unprecedented humiliation, knowing that any further escalation could lead to a conflagration that no one can control. The perimeter has been breached, the troops have retreated, and the map of the Middle East has been rewritten in fire. The age of certainty is over, and a new, more dangerous chapter of history has begun.